What are we exploring today?
Today we're tackling a topic you all requested, the challenges cross-dressers face.
Oh, that's an important one. Lots of layers there.
It is. Really going to get into the thick of it, the social dynamics, the personal side of things.
And we're looking at this through a sociological lens, right?
Oh, no it.
I think folks will find this deep dive pretty eye-opening, with all the misconceptions floating around.
Totally agree. Our main guide for this one is Gender Benson's piece, The Challenges of Cross-Dressing, Navigating Stigmas, Perceptions, and Social Barriers.
That's a great piece.
It is. And honestly, some of the stuff she talks about was pretty surprising, even to me.
I bet.
So we're going to unpack all sorts of things, like why cross-dressing is considered taboo, the whole disconnect between cross-dressing and sexuality, and what it's really like day-to-day for cross-dressers.
Sounds fascinating. Where should we jump in?
Well, I keep coming back to that fundamental question. Why is cross-dressing even seen as taboo? Like, where does that come from?
Right to the heart of it. Well, you see, it really comes down to societal norms, these deeply ingrained ideas about gender roles. For centuries, societies have been assigning specific clothing items to men and women, even though clothes themselves, have no inherent gender.
It's like clothes are just fabric, right?
Yeah.
But we've loaded all this meaning onto them.
Exactly. Fabric, thread, that's it. But we make it about so much more. And when someone challenges those norms by cross-dressing, by bucking those expectations,
Yeah.
it disrupts things.
Yeah.
Makes people uncomfortable, especially those who are really attached to traditional views. It can even lead to hostility in some cases.
You're right. It's almost like people feel threatened by someone playing with those boundaries.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's this fear of the unknown, this fear of what happens if we question those fixed categories we've created.
And hasn't religion played a pretty big role in shaping these negative perceptions, too?
Absolutely. Many religious texts reinforce strict gender roles. Some even condemn folks who don't conform.
Wow. So how does all this historical baggage, this fear of messing with gender norms, how does that actually play out in the real world?
Well, that's where we can get into some sociological theories. Are you familiar with Judith Butler's work on gender performativity?
Vaguely, but to be honest, I need a bit of a refresher.
Oh, sure thing. So Butler argues that gender isn't something we are. It's something we do. It's a performance. We learn these behaviors, these expressions, and then we repeat them. Cross-dressing kind of throws a wrench in all that. It challenges those learned associations between what we wear and our gender.
So by wearing clothes usually associated with the opposite gender, cross-dressers are basically messing with that script, that performance society expects.
Precisely. And that's where the friction comes in, that clash between expectation and reality.
It's funny because even today, those ideas about gendered clothing are still everywhere. Just walk into any department store and you see the men's and women's sections so clearly defined.
And it's not just the sections, right?
No.
It's the colors, the patterns they use,
Yeah.
even how the clothes are displayed. Everything just reinforces this idea that there are these separate clothing categories and men and women have to stick to them.
Wow. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. So even just the design of stores, the marketing, it all plays into those rigid gender norms.
Subtle, but it's there. And think about how this starts even earlier. Toys, for example.
Oh, yeah. The pink aisle for girls and blue for boys. It starts so young.
Exactly. It's these seemingly small things that build and build. They contribute to how we learn about gender and ultimately how we perceive those who don't fit the norm, like cross-dressers.
All this ties into another big misconception I wanted to talk about. This idea that all cross-dressers are gay or transgender. Der Benson really made it clear that this is just plain wrong.
Yeah, that's a harmful stereotype that needs to be busted.
For sure.
Cross-dressing is not about your sexual orientation or gender identity. There's no link. They could be married, have kids, and lead totally conventional lives outside of their dressing.
It's more about personal expression. Right. Not about sexuality or gender identity.
Exactly. And the reasons people cross-dress, they're so diverse. Some people just love how certain clothes make them feel. It's purely aesthetic. For others, it's about exploring different parts of themselves.
Yeah.
Tapping into a different side of their personality.
And, that leads me to how media portrays cross-dressers.
Oh, that's a big one.
Right, because media plays such a huge role in how we view things.
Absolutely. It shapes our perceptions.
And historically, it hasn't been great for cross-dressers. Lots of stereotypes.
Yeah, very true.
It's like they're always portrayed in this really stereotypical light.
Yeah, think about movies like Psycho or Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, yeah, those are classic examples.
They link cross-dressing to, deviant behavior, even criminal. But the good news is we are starting to see some more nuanced portrayals, at least.
Oh, for sure. Like Pose or RuPaul's Drag Race come to mind.
Exactly. Those shows do a much better job of capturing the creativity and artistry.
It's not just about clothes, right?
No, it's about creating a persona, expressing something true about yourself, pushing those societal boundaries.
It's like performance art, almost.
It is.
And speaking of real-world stuff, let's talk about some of the challenges cross-dressers face day to day.
Okay, let's get into it.
Joe Benson's research really dives into this, and social rejection and isolation are huge.
They are. It's a big hurdle, that fear of judgment from loved ones, at work, just everywhere.
It's like a constant worry of being found out
Right.
and then being ridiculed or rejected, especially by your family and friends.
Absolutely. It's a heavy burden.
It makes me think about how brave those who choose to live authentically are, knowing the potential consequences.
It takes a lot of courage, for sure.
And it's not even just about being found out, it's those little everyday things.
Yeah.
Like going to the store, using a public restroom, things most people don't even think about.
But for someone worried about judgment, those things become stressful.
You're right, it's like you're always on edge.
It is. It's this constant vigilance, like you're scanning for threats.
Wow, yeah, I get that. That would take a toll over time.
Absolutely. It affects your mental and emotional well-being.
Makes sense.
Drew Benson also talks about the challenges in romantic relationships, which is something many people don't consider.
That's true.
Like, imagine being afraid to tell someone you love about this part of you.
Yeah, that fear of rejection.
Because they might not understand or accept it. It can be a real barrier to intimacy.
And even lead to breakups.
Absolutely. That's why communication is so important. Both partners need to be open and honest, willing to talk about it.
Can educate themselves, right?
Yes, and be empathetic. It's about creating a safe space where both people can be themselves.
It takes work, for sure.
It does. But relationships can be so supportive for cross-dressers when both partners are on board.
For sure. And then there's the workplace.
Oh, yeah. That could be a minefield.
Right. Because even with more awareness nowadays, there are still so many places where expressing your gender identity could hurt your career.
Especially in conservative environments, you're right.
It's scary to think about being passed over for a promotion or even fired just because of how you express yourself.
It's a legitimate fear, unfortunately. And it's not just about blatant discrimination either.
What do you mean?
Well, there are those smaller things, the microaggressions that happen.
What's a microaggression?
It could be like a colleague making a comment about your clothes or being excluded from social events.
Oh, I see what you mean. So those little things that build up over time.
Right. It makes you feel like you don't belong.
That would be awful.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Wow, yeah. And it makes it hard to just do your job.
It does. It creates a hostile environment.
And on top of social and professional challenges, Benson also brings up the legal and safety concerns.
That's important.
Especially in places where LGBTQ+ rights aren't protected.
It's a sad reality that in some parts of the world, cross-dressers face harassment, even violence.
Just for being themselves.
It's a reminder that while we've made progress, there's still a long way to go.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the tough stuff. Now let's talk about how to actually navigate this.
Okay, good idea.
Where do you even start?
Well, Benson says self-acceptance is key.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's about embracing your identity, realizing that you're not wrong for being who you are.
It's about owning your truth, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's not easy, especially with all the negativity out there. But that inner strength, that self-worth, it's crucial.
It's the foundation, right?
It is. And finding a good support system can make all the difference.
Totally. Like having people who understand and accept you.
Right. Whether it's online communities, LGBTQ+ organizations, or close friends and family, those connections matter.
It's about finding your people.
Exactly. Those who get it.
And what about LGBTQ+ organizations? How do they help?
Well, a lot of them have programs and resources specifically for cross-dressers, like social events, counseling, or advocacy work.
So they're working to create a more welcoming world.
They are. And it's not just about direct support. They also raise awareness, educate people, and fight against discrimination.
It's about making a real change in society.
It is, and it takes ongoing effort.
I keep thinking back to what we talked about with self-acceptance. It seems so fundamental.
It really is. Without that, it's hard to face the challenges, build good relationships, or even speak up for yourself.
It's about loving and accepting yourself, even when the world tells you not to.
That's a great way to put it. It's about knowing you're worthy, no matter what anyone else says.
And that's not always easy. This deep dive has left me with this one question. If clothes don't actually have a gender, why do we make such a big deal about who wears what?
That's the question, isn't it? It forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves why these norms are so powerful.
And why they persist, even when they cause harm.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
I hope this deep dive has given you all a fresh perspective on cross-dressing.
Me too. It's a complex topic.
And there's so much more to learn. But remember, it all starts with being open-minded and having empathy.
Couldn't have said it better myself.